Anyway, welcome to Apex Reviews. Today we're going to be doing a brake pad replacement on a 2018 C7 Corvette Z06 with the carbon ceramic brakes. Coming into this project, I was a little worried it was going to be above my skill level, but I'll be honest, it really wasn't that bad. We started with the front end. First thing we did, of course, was loosen up all the lug nuts. Then we jacked up the car. You can see I've got the jack pucks installed. Some people have claimed they needed to purchase a low-profile jack. I didn't need one with this car. If your jack doesn't fit, you can try jacking up the rear end first, and that'll help with the suspension. Then lower the rear end, and you might be able to fit the jack underneath to lift up the front end. Any which way you do it, you definitely have to focus on not damaging your ground effects. Next, we jacked up the tire just ever so slightly off the ground. The goal here was to be able to pull the tire off, but if for some reason it dropped, we didn't want the rim contacting the carbon ceramic brake. That's a good way to chip a brake, and we didn't want to do that. These brakes are way too expensive to be messing around. If your wheels have never been taken off, or if the lug nuts were installed and over-tightened, you may have to use a rubber mallet to help loosen it off the studs. I kept a couple of lug nuts on there just to make sure the tire didn't come off. I was rotating the wheel around as my son was hitting it from behind. He was focusing on the rubber tire, not the rim. We didn't want to bend anything. You could start to see it come loose. After it was loosened up, I took the lug nuts off, and that way we could take the tire all the way off. Once the tire was all the way off, we lifted the car up even more so that we could put a jack stand under it. My next fear was that my jack was going to lose hydraulic power and slowly lower the car onto that carbon ceramic brake. Again, that was something we were looking to avoid. Here's a schematic of where you can put the jacks. I'll show you a picture of it also. There are preferred locations and optional locations, all of which coincide with the gridded metal you see here. Next thing we did was remove the cap off the master cylinder. You're going to be spreading the pads apart from the disc, and you need the cap to be off so that the system will depressurize. Next, we took a hole punch and a rubber mallet and slowly backed out the top and bottom pins, holding the spring pressure plate in place. Be careful not to hit the brake with that metal. It'll definitely chip the paint. Once you get the top pin pulled out, you can take the whole pressure plate off. This will help you get to the bottom pin, and you'll have to remove that black bolt securing the brakes in. I set everything on the ground in the same way that I took it off. That way I know which way it goes back on. This is the side view. If you fast forward a little bit, we'll turn the brake so that you can see the back of it from head on. The carbon ceramic brakes on the Corvette don't have wear bars. Instead, they use electronic pill sensing. From this angle, you can see the pill on the bottom left. Once those pads wear down and contact that pill, that's when a light will come on in your dash telling you it's time to replace the pads. These pads still had plenty of life left. I don't remember what size socket we used to remove the retaining bolt, but it was pretty standard. Once the black retaining bolt is removed, I just used my fingers to compress the pistons. This gives you room to slide the pads out. The inside pad will have the electronic pad sensor attached to it. If you want to reuse these, you have to be super careful in removing them from the pad. I would suggest buying a new set and replacing those and the pads at the same time. I have a video that'll show you how if you're interested. I popped that pill off the pad with a pair of pliers. I did end up damaging them. The backing came off. These things get hot and cool off a whole lot while driving, and the plastic becomes pretty brittle. I definitely suggest replacing those wires if you're going to replace your pads. After you pull the pads out, it's real easy to reach your fingers in there and compress each of the 6 pistons. You'll need to do this for the new pads to slide in. The pads I purchased had cutouts for the electronic sensor on each pad. That way you could use them on either wheel. You do need to pay attention to the top and bottom though. There is only one way they'll fit. Once you slide the pads in, you'll have to reconnect that electronic pill. Otherwise, you'll get a warning message on your dash. If you're planning on putting on new wires, it's easier to insert the pill into the pad before routing the wire. Otherwise, you're not going to have much room to work. I used a hole punch to tap that pill back into the slot. As I said before, I ended up damaging these sensors and had to replace them all. My method worked. These were damaged when I pulled them out, but I wouldn't suggest doing it this way. After you get the pads seated in and that sensor reconnected, it's time to put the retaining bolt back in. Next, we reinstalled the bottom pin, then the retaining clip, and then the top pin. There are indentations in the pins to help seat the retaining clip. It's easier to put the retaining clip in these grooves than to mount it and try to slide it in. There's a lot of pressure on that clip. Once you put the pins in, you're going to want to feel them snap. That snap lets you know they locked in place. I pushed on the ends with my fingers just to make sure they weren't going to back out. The back side of the pin should be flush with the brake. The mallet I was using was a rubber mallet, so it didn't do any damage. If you want to give those pins a little wiggle before inserting the retaining clip, that'll give you some reassurance that those pins aren't going to move. Next, we put the tire back on. My son and I did this together so that we didn't damage the brake. You could remove the jack stand and lower the car down, but again, my concern was that something was going to go wrong with the jack and the whole car would be lowered down onto that brake. So since I had the car secured in the up position, I just went ahead and used him to help me put the wheel back on. We put all the nuts on finger tight. Then we used a lug wrench to cinch them down. Then we lowered the car back down and tightened each lug nut to 100 foot-pounds of torque. Now that the front brake is done, let's take a look at the back brake. The one thing you don't see in this picture is that we did have the wheels chalked. We had to release the emergency brake so we could spin the wheel. The jack fits under the rear jack puck a little bit better than the front one. And again, you have that graded metal, helping you identify a good place to put the jack stand. I would definitely revisit that schematic though to make sure that you're putting it in the right place. I was using the jack stands to make sure that if my jack failed, the car wouldn't come down. I never actually pulled the jack out from underneath the car. I pulled the rear wheel off using the same method as the front wheel. Doing the back brake is essentially the same as the front. It's actually a little bit easier because there's no black retaining bolt. After removing the top pin, pulling out that spring clip is pretty easy. Again, make sure not to hit that red brake caliper with that metal hole punch. The last thing you want to do is scrape up that brake caliper. Again, you'll use your fingers to spread the pad away from the disc. Be careful not to damage that disc, they're expensive. You'll need to do this so that you can slide out the old brake pad, and then you'll need to push the 4 calipers back in even more so you can install the new brake pads. You can see on the back of this caliper where the electronic sensor is attached. The calipers are really easy to feel. There's 4 of them on the back, 6 on the front. They're about the size of a quarter. You'll be able to see the marks of the calipers on the back of the brake pads, but when you stick your fingers in there, they're easy to identify. Just putting a little pressure on them will move them back in place, giving you room to install the brake pad. Installing the brake pad sensor pill into the rear brakes was a lot easier than the front. I'm not sure why, it just seemed to go smoother. You're going to want to make sure to secure that wire back into that friction hold. Otherwise, the wire is going to come loose, rub, and break, and then you'll get a light up on your dash. This one was a little trickier to get to. Once you hear it snap into place, give it a little wiggle to make sure it's locked. There might be a tiny little bit of play in there, but you'll definitely feel that it's not coming out. Make sure to put the retaining clip back in the correct spot. You're also going to want to make sure that the retaining clip is fitting in the grooves that are in the pin. It's a lot easier to install it in these grooves before there's pressure on it than to try to move it after both pins are installed. I didn't find a real clean way to install that top pin. The plate is putting a lot of pressure on the pin, and you're trying to line up both the pads and the holes in the brake. In the end, you just have to muscle through it. I put the rear wheel on just like I did the front wheel, and lowered the card back down. Once you put your cap back on your master cylinder, you'll have to pump the brakes some to build up some pressure. Good luck with your brake job, and thanks for watching.